Welcome back. Today I am sharing one of the biggest issues and common themes that I see in veterans today. Keep in mind that many of the issues we talk about, this one especially, are products of thousands and thousands of interviews over thousands and thousands of hours over many years. This one especially was really hard to triangulate, really hard to find. It took maybe 2 or 3 years of peeling back the layers of multiple different veterans from multiple different eras. I've had a good number of Korean veterans, a lot of Vietnam veterans, a lot of Desert Storm, a lot of OIF, OEF, and a lot of in between, and even those super special folks, places that we've never been. One of the biggest themes that we're talking about here is one that is really hard to detect. It goes under the radar. It can be sort of the core or the nucleus of many other secondary or even tertiary issues. So common therapy, self-help, all these different tools and modalities may get through the first layer or the tertiary issues and even get into the deeper secondary issues, but many times they're not hitting this core. And not only that, many of these symptoms that you'll find in this issue, many of these symptoms that are produced here actually mirror PTSD symptoms such as avoidance, tendency to be angry, paranoid, hypervigilant, avoidance. Avoidance is huge. Avoidance of physical things and places, events, conversations, social. The issue is the inability to emotionally connect, to be able to connect with ourselves, other people, relationships, spouses, children, people, places, and situations, holidays. Now, this may seem simple on its face, but the hair that I'd like to split here is that many times I find that people, they mentally know that they love their family members and that they would even die for these family members. But here's the hair we're splitting. That can be a great thing in a mental understanding. But what I find is that then when we switch gears into emotions, we're not actually feeling it. We don't feel or experience that. Most of our experience with that idea of connection to other people or places or situations is mostly mental. It's 80-85% mental with only 10 or 15% emotion. And it can be difficult because, of course, it may be partially in their nature and in the nature of American masculinity to be less emotional. But what I'm saying is that we don't necessarily need to be 50-50, half emotional, half mental to balance these things. But what we do have to pay attention to is that many times emotions simply are muted, that we wind up not having literally the capacity to experience emotion, and it becomes this big issue, or even this large sense of knowing that's kind of in the back of our brain that we don't feel as connected to our loved ones as we should, or maybe we only experience connection with our child or children, or only with our spouse, but everyone else seems very far away. We can be in a party or with a bunch of people, but we feel completely alone. We feel like this outlier. That's why if a veteran is within 5 or 8 years of military service, many times they'll talk about going back into the military to get that brother or sisterhood again. And what that deeper symptom and issue is that they're not feeling connected to things. And we're going to talk about the dynamics of that and peel this all open and share with you what I've heard from the tons and tons of voices of veterans. But first, whenever we begin to clear up some of these issues, and even just understanding, whenever we understand something, it's as if we have dipped into the subconscious mind, unearthed this negative program or habit, and brought it into the conscious mind and shed light on it, literally shed light on it. And when we do that, that light and understanding that we've shed on it acts as, it's kind of fiery. It begins to deprogram, disassemble, and remove the issue. So there's a lot of power in even simple understanding about these complex topics. On the other side of not feeling emotionally connected, for instance, is feelings and themes of competence, confidence, feeling worthy, owning more of the situation, stop living in fear, stop running away from things. We are more eager to understand. We're more eager to learn. We have more humility and openness. All these things can spiral simply by understanding what's really going on, what's really happened, and begin to reverse the process. by understanding, through growing our awareness, through analysis, mental analysis, and understanding this, we grow our awareness so we can play with more and more pieces of the puzzle. As we grow awareness, we introduce or even create new pieces of the puzzle, so we're not constantly looking at the past or playing with these older pieces of the puzzle that just don't fit together real well. One example of this is that I remember very clearly where I was when I had this realization. My wife now, she was my girlfriend then, we were living in this 450 square foot apartment. You could almost have all appendages in different rooms of the apartment. Our desk and office space was actually in part of our really tiny kitchen. And I was sitting there at the desk with my back to the kitchen, facing forward. There was a wall right in front of me. And I had this realization as I was writing down my goals for that year, what I wanted to do. I found the opposite. I actually found some of the things that I was lacking in that moment. And one of them was that I knew things were getting serious with my girlfriend at the time, but what I knew deep down in my heart was that I wasn't able to emotionally connect fully or even partially with her, and that she deserved and needed more of that from me. And not only that, if I was to marry her and then have kids, I knew that I would have this fractured relationship with them if I didn't do something about it now. And it was very overwhelming to have this realization. I had this view in my mind. I was sitting on the front or back porch of a house, and my couple of kids were playing, and I could see myself feeling so incredibly disconnected from that all I would be able to think about in that moment was actually the safety and the action that I was prepared to take for them. And all of these, again, very infantry, very masculine, very dominating, powerful things, which made me think, man, I feel really powerless in this instance, which is why I'm ramping up so many themes of action and even anger and overcoming something. I was like, what am I overcoming? What is in front of me that is so threatening? I didn't know, but what it was this program of disconnection. And I knew deep down in my heart that if I didn't do anything massive, if I didn't take massive action and begin undoing this and doing the opposite quality of disconnection, that's the life that I would live out. That if I did wind up getting married and having kids, that I would be completely disconnected from them and I wouldn't be who I needed to be. And so that's just one example of how this plays out in the massive stage that I and many of the people that I've worked with have shared this issue in different various forms. The example we're going to use is basic training, and the full name of basic training is actually basic combat training, because you're learning the basics, you're being indoctrinated into the military, you're being acculturated and assimilated into the norms of the military culture, and you're being taught the basic tools, mentalities, attitudes, and responses that you need to have. And really, it's a programming phase of a bunch of short-term tools that you can use and have to make yourself effective in combat, in intense situations, so you can take care of the tasks that you need to take care of, that's going to support all the other tasks of everyone else, that's going to make you and your unit mission complete. The military has a tall task. They have to train as many people as they can, as fast as they can, as well as they can. They have created and devised a massive system to pump through civilians and pop out soldiers. It is beautiful. It's amazing. The simple fact that we can produce soldiers who, even in different branches of the service, like the Army and the Marines, they can meet on the battlefield and communicate with each other is fantastic. It's beautiful. It's amazing. That we take for granted, but it's a major military feat, and it's one of the reasons why America is a huge, major, powerful fighting force. I will take my personal experience with basic training, but also the experiences from so many veterans from multiple different eras, and combine it into one general example that will help highlight and elucidate the principles that we're talking about here. So backing way up, we're on the bus. We roll up to the military base. There's gate guards and fencing, and the anxiety of the soldier goes way up, skyrockets. Everything looks the same, all the buildings. You get through the gate, and you're making left and right turns. You're going to the in-processing center. And at that time, the people at the in-processing center, our actual cadre or drill sergeants, as we called them in the Army, were standing there. And so that's not normal, I don't think, anymore. I think you have drill sergeants who just do in-processing, and then you meet your personal cadre you'll have for the coming weeks later. But ours were standing there. There was one exemplary soldier. I remember his name. I won't share his name, but he was one of those super duper soldiers, previous Ranger Battalion, multiple Purple Hearts, had done a bunch of stuff and had made E7 in 7 years and was this awesome, huge, great, fantastic human being. He was standing there in the center, and they collectively kind of looked like gargoyles standing against the in-processing center building. They didn't move. They had those brimmed hats, and they looked very much like statues. So the bus rolls to a stop. The driver throws open the door, and as if a silent explosion went off, the drill sergeant suddenly broke out into a frenzy, sprinted onto the bus to very scared and very silent civilians, and they began screaming, "Why are you still on the bus?" in various ways. We were astonished and stunned, and everyone began grasping for their bags. And again, the bus, they had those high seats, so everybody's trying to carry their bags up over this onto their shoulders and get out. But of course, these multiple drill sergeants, I think 3 or 4 of them, with 2 or 3 of them still outside of the bus, 3 or 4 of them are standing in the walkway. So they're screaming at you, "Why are you still on the bus?" and telling you how stupid you are and how much of an idiot you are for still being on the bus. But yet it's really hard to kind of scoot past them because, again, they're screaming, and everyone else is trying to do the same thing as well. So finally, people begin spilling themselves and their luggage and their crap out onto the pavement, where there are more drill sergeants continuing to scream at you. I remember it very clearly because I was so bewildered and confused, to put your feet in the feet. They were screaming at you, "Put your feet in the feet. Go put your feet in the feet. Why aren't your feet in the feet?" And we didn't know what to do. So by this point, it's kind of humorous, but it's kind of scared, and those emotions are kind of similar tone, just expressed, positively and negatively. So finally, we figure out that there's these yellow feet with the heels together, just about 10 feet away. So we begin putting our feet in the feet and dropping our bags and just standing there. And so more people come out. They fall in line. We're in this makeshift formation, and the gargoyles eventually turn into sharks. So the drill sergeants collect all the stragglers, they get them back to the new formation, and they begin circling the formation. And there's one main drill instructor, drill sergeant, that is screaming at everyone and giving them simple instructions. So you target and correct one person that's doing one thing wrong, and you correct the whole group. So the first thing I remember was putting our bags. Many people are right-handed, they had their bags on their right side, so you don't do that in the military. You put your bags, at least in the Army, on your left side, because you pick them up with your left hand, because you always keep your right hand, which is generally your trigger hand and your saluting hand, free. So as people are shuffling around, then you're screamed at for shuffling around, of course. And so everything in the beginning is very, very active, directive. They're being very active participants, and they're being very, very directive, but they're also being very, very confrontational. They're training you to receive simple instruction, take that, and then go execute. Meanwhile, all the other drill instructors or drill sergeants are continuing to circle. They circle, they circle, they circle. They begin using different tactics to shock and awe, which one might be invading personal space. It's physical. They invade your personal space. They may come from your back right and scream partially in your ear to stop looking around and stop moving. They teach you don't look at someone's eyes or into someone's eyes. You look through people. You don't have wandering eyes, even though it's a very, very natural civilian tendency, especially these kids, again, are 18 years old, 19 years old usually. So they're screaming, "Shut your mouth, eyes forward. Shut your mouth, eyes forward." Meanwhile, other drill sergeants are beginning to inject jokes. So again, we've used confrontation, invading personal space, and then humor. One, I remember someone was looking in the eyes of a drill sergeant that was passing them, and the drill sergeant responded, "What, do I look pretty to you? Do you want to buy me a drink later? You want to take me out on a date? Or do I look like your mother?" These jokes and these different scenarios keep popping off, Everyone is listening to 3 or 4 different corrections at a time. They're trying to pick them up as fast as they can. And this is all within the first 2 minutes of arriving at the in-processing center. So this isn't inherently bad. They're breaking them down so they can build them back up. They're cutting out a lot of the crap. And truthfully, it needs to happen. After all, my favorite quote and the mantra of my favorite drill sergeant was, "Don't do dumb shit." He would have us say that in cadence over and over and over again, or we would do push-ups to it, or all these different kinds of things. We would repeat it over and over and over and over and over again. It's something that still comes to my mind time to time, and I love it. I wouldn't change anything about it. Now, what's the purpose of all this? It has many, many purposes. Even the military culture embodies these first 2 minutes with this cutting the crap, stop the whining and complaining thoughts and emotions, and receive simple instruction and execute. Shut your mouth, move on. And a simple example of this is one of the first engagements we had in Afghanistan. One of my more favorite soldiers, he was one of our long guns. He had a 7.62 or a 308 rifle. So in Afghanistan, we would commonly get dynamically attacked. What's that mean? Well, we would be set up on an objective and observing something, or many times we would be leaving an objective and we would get pop shots from, let's say, the north. And then as we engaged and quieted down the firing, then we would pick up and begin exiting maybe the east or the south. But then there'd be more pop shots, so we'd have to get back down. So bit by bit, we would get more and more out of formation and more vulnerable, which is common, pretty standard stuff. But the enemy, everything where I was in Afghanistan was a hill or a mountain. So they would get on their little motorcycle, and you could hear them buzzing around in the distance, but they would get into the valleys and the creek beds, and they would go and buzz over to maybe the east or the south, and they would do more pop shots. So we would constantly be getting pop shots from the north, the east, the west, the south, wherever it was. And it'd be a real pain in the ass, but it would sometimes seem like, because they'd be so effective at it, that there'd be multiple fighters. So to combat this, I picked a soldier I trust, I really liked, and I told this guy, hey, orient your rifle to the south. That way, if they go east or west, since they're firing from the north, if they go east or west and they go too far, or if they go completely south, you'll be able to spot them, you'll be able to shoot them, and we'll be able to move on with our day. So he executed. He's in the prone position facing south and maybe 15 feet behind me. And suddenly we receive much heavier fire from the east. And when that happened, it was just a split second, maybe in a long second and a half, there was fire going over our head. We could hear it. It was hitting the trees above us, but it was also hitting at our feet, but it was also snapping by our ears. So you know you're in the kill zone. Usually if it's at your feet or way over your head, it's not a big deal. You just get used to it after a while. But we knew that we were getting sprayed with more accurate fire, and we needed to do something now. And so again, this second and a half, I begin moving to an area of cover and beginning to reorient my soldiers. And my guy back here, I remember very clearly, I remember turning to my left. I see him out of the corner of my eye. He turns to me and asks me, hey, sir, can I get up and move? It was so funny because it's a no-brainer. You know, your safety is number one. You need to stay oriented towards the direction you're oriented, but get to a safe position and maintain that orientation, and then wait for further instruction. But for example, the basic training process and those short-term tools of cutting off from your environment, your thoughts and your emotions, and adhering to the mission and the simple instruction you've received from your leaders is so ingrained in the soldier that they will even risk obvious life and death by following through with those simple instructions. And not only that, they will have the cognizance to even ask, can they move? But my reaction is, of course, get up and move now. So that's just one small example of the value but also the level of intensity or depth that soldiers are trained, that breaking them down so we can build them back up, is very real. It's very powerful. It has a lot of positive qualities, but it has some negative qualities too. There's just certain byproducts. Again, the military, they have that tall task: train as many people as they can, as well as they can, as fast as they can. There's just certain negative byproducts that are going to come out of that. And one of the core ones in those first 2 minutes of basic training, what is happening when you are receiving that instruction, that confrontation, that humor, and that violation of personal space. Because what is personal space in the military, especially basic training? You don't have it. You give up those personal freedoms. You are not yours anymore, is the mentality. And maybe even the truth, not even the partial truth, the full truth. So what's really happening is that you are beginning to learn to cut off from your own emotional responses, your own thoughts, your own desires, your own wants and desires. Your natural tendency for self-preservation is trained out of you systematically with powerful psychological tools. Basic training, the structure of it, the mentality of it, is not an accident. Drill sergeant school is not an accident. They didn't just accidentally half-assed put this shit together. They did it very purposefully, very systematically, using very powerful psychological tools in a stepped and tiered process to produce a particular result. It isn't this negative conspiracy theory brainwashing thing. It is using cognitive therapies and simple tools over and over again, thousands and thousands of times a day, to reorient that person's behavior and attitude. And again, these things produce a lot of positive qualities, but they also produce a lot of negative qualities. And cutting off, especially from your emotions and yourself, is one of them. Not to mention that being in control, feeling in control, showing in different ways that you're in control is a very masculine, very American quality. So this tendency to be this training process of the emotional responses and the tendency to cut off from emotion to be trained out of you is also a prized masculine quality. It can snowball, and this short-term tool that's trained into you can then be carried as this guidon, this torch throughout the rest of your life whenever you leave the military service. Because remember, the average service member only spends 3 to 6 years in the military. They leave, they go back to the civilian world, they bring these tools with them because, number one, they're masculine tools. They're masculine qualities. They're prized masculine qualities. But they've also been trained very deeply, but they've also usually went through the pressure cooker of combat, and so experienced and used these tools under tremendous amount of stress day in and day out, and relied on them because, again, they're prized qualities to help them survive, that they cling to them, they get enmeshed with them. And so it's hard to deprogram that, remove those tendencies. And a huge part of that, again, can be understanding what it is, connecting these dots, where it originated from, understanding that it, on a bigger picture, it is part of American masculine culture, but in a concentrated form, you're given a concentrated dose of that training in basic training. So a simple way to understand this: we're being trained to have this military bearing, to have this inner core that we're constantly going out, that we're coming back to, and we don't overreact or overdo this. We're just here, and we act on our environment. We don't allow our environment to control us. This is a very stoic way of presenting ourselves, and I love Stoicism, the philosophy. It suits my personality, my mind, and even cognitive therapy very well. But this version that I'm talking about is like a bastardized version of Stoicism, not necessarily the philosophy, but if you look at the definition of Stoic in Merriam-Webster, for example, it talks about being indifferent to your emotions, or being in control of a situation, or projecting the sense that you are in control. And so that word indifference is very important. Indifference means to not have the capacity to literally not have the raw material, the software, or even the hardware to house the software for emotional connection, to cut off that circuitry to our emotions in such a way that we retain this very hardened, very powerful, centered core. But the problem is we don't achieve that through mastering our emotions. We achieve it by rejecting our emotions many times, because again, that's the shortcut. That's the path of least resistance. That's the lowest hanging fruit on the tree, because again, the military, they have a tall task to train as many soldiers as they can, as fast as they can, as well as they can. And that's the path of least resistance for the human being, for American culture. It would take a shitload longer to produce mastery over emotions. And if you look at it if you are the military with all of the branches, your investment in civilians that are only going to spend 3 to 6 years in the military, that's a short time. In fact, war is a young person's game anyway, and so your investment in people is going to be short term. So why take what the long time it's going to take to master more of your emotions, when the short, simple way is to just use what people are doing partially anyways, which is rejecting, deflecting, stuffing, medicating emotions, not just through substances, but also through anger, irritability, stuff like that, and train those principles so we can execute and all get along for long enough to accomplish enough missions so we can do war. It's not about having a positive or negative opinion of that fact or those facts. I love my military service. I wouldn't change anything about it. I love the military, but we have to be honest. If we are not being honest with ourselves, then we are looking at those puzzle pieces from such an angle that we can't see them accurately, so we can't use that puzzle piece effectively. So when we reject an emotion or it rolls off our shoulders, we think that it's not going to affect us, but our subconscious mind is recording everything. Every face we see, it's this supercomputer. It really truly is. And when we reject emotion, if we would look at scans and look at the science of psychoneurology, if my arm from the shoulder to the elbow to the wrist to the hand to the fingertips is a neurological pathway, and this pathway is overlaid on our brain, when we reject emotion and reject emotion and reject emotion, we would think that if your fingertips, for example, are different emotions and different neurological pathways allowing you to experience those emotions, that maybe your pinky, ring finger, and middle finger are positive emotions and your index and thumb are negative emotions. We would think that rejecting a negative emotion would just eventually cut off and numb the thumb and the index finger or the negative emotions, but it is not so. Our brains cannot delineate or see the difference between positive and negative emotions. It reads in your brain, in your supercomputer, as rejecting emotion. It's saying to the organism that is you, I don't want to experience emotion. I don't want to experience emotion. And when you get trained like this in basic training, your probability of, if for example, you experience, let's say, 10,000 emotions in a day, and you're already naturally reject 150 of them. Well, whenever we go to basic training, we may be trained to reject 5,000. So if we are rejecting and rejecting and rejecting and sending that message to our subconscious mind and our physical brain, our brain says, oh, Roger, I got it, and actually cuts the neurological pathway off at the elbow. So then the emotion doesn't flow down to the different neurological pathways that are going to lead to positive emotions or negative emotions. That person begins to experience life as generally gray. They begin to feel disconnected from people, disconnected from themselves, even from their bodies, from their thoughts, from their emotions. A lot of new research is coming out that PTSD, for example, has a lot of, or can have a lot of, dissociative symptoms with it. Disassociation means disassociation with ourselves, with our body, with reality, meaning that our life can seem a little bit more dreamlike at times, or it can feel like we're actually in a dream acting out, that I'm this puppet or actor. That I remember experiencing it as if I was kind of peering out through my eye holes, but I wasn't actually connected to my body. And it was this really weird reality where something had seemed to be, a wedge had been driven between me and who I really was, and my physical body and my relationships. It was like I was looking at people. And another dissociative symptom is sometimes people's heads might look physically smaller than their bodies, or their hands, or people's hands might look really big as compared to the rest of their body. That is a dissociative symptom. You're disassociating from your physical body, from your world. It's just another theme. But what psychologists and the psychology world doesn't understand, because many of them, number one, aren't military, and many of the therapists and psychologists, they were officers like I was, and they didn't go through basic training, for example. They went through ROTC or West Point, their training processes. I was an officer candidate, went to officer candidate school, so I went through basic training. And not only that, there is a huge overemphasis on trauma. Yes, trauma is a big deal, but even this training process can be traumatic. You're experiencing miniature crises many times, which again doesn't have to be this negative thing. Crises are an opportunity for growth, and we can take them in a positive way, but they can have a negative aspect, especially cumulatively. Another huge thing you have to remember is that most of the basic trainees in all branches are 18 to 21 or 2 years old. The prefrontal cortex, which is the front third or quarter of your brain, it is commonly referred to as the CEO of your brain. It houses your personality. It houses your likes and dislikes. Rather, the things that you think you like and dislike are housed there. Really, your likes and dislikes have been things that have been programmed into you in this reward basis that you've borrowed from other people. We don't have to get into the subconscious mind and how it's programmed, but the CEO of the brain is that prefrontal cortex. That thing does not stop developing and growing until your late 20s, or some research is even saying your early 30s. Why do you think a lot of higher public offices, you have to be at least 35 years old? Because most of your personality is going to be cemented by then. Another way to look at it is if you read memoirs of people and you read about the process of writing a memoir from some of the greatest memoirists we have, they will say that don't even bother writing, the average person don't even bother writing a memoir until you're about 35 years old. You need those cumulative experiences, and you need that 35-year-old brain to be able to more concretely connect these things, understand what's going on, and see the fuller picture. Literally, because you many times don't have the capacity to do it because your brain hasn't developed to a point to give you the physiological basis or capacity to be able to do that. So here we are rewiring the core aspects of that personality in a very vulnerable time for that prefrontal cortex. It makes sense that these simple training processes, for example, can produce some of the major heavy hitters of PTSD symptoms, for example. Also, this is another huge piece that is underrepresented in research and veteran culture that no one's talking about, that really amplifies the whole dynamic that we've already talked about, is ACE scores, ACE, adverse childhood experiences. Now, most of the military is male, and I am specifically targeting and talking about males right now. This is again a general conversation. I'm not saying it concretely that this is exactly how it goes every time. This is what I have personally experienced and the many veterans that I have worked with. Even in policing, it's a very similar story. But ACE scores, what has been statistically found, what studies are suggesting, is that people that join the military have a significantly higher tendency to have had adverse childhood experiences or to have an ACE score, meaning that people had either crappy childhoods or not good childhoods. And this doesn't mean that you had to have gotten your ass kicked or had these terrible experiences. Those are included, but there are neglect or emotional abuse or these different subtle things that may not be characterized as obviously as adverse childhood experiences. I get to talking to people, and many times they say things like, well, my childhood was okay, but it wasn't as bad as this or that. We constantly are comparing ourselves to other people and stories we've heard, and sure, there's always going to be worse things, but that tends to mute that person's experience and not honor it and not be and it shuts down the ability for them to actually bring it up, look at it, turn it around like a Rubik's Cube in their mind and see what really was going on. If we try to put our mind, our attitude, our mentality into a young male's mind that did not have great experiences as a childhood, what is the easiest way for them to get out of that crappy or mediocre experience in existence, get away from that crap, and begin and start new and start fresh? The military. So at a disproportionate rate, the military is attracting people who had adverse childhood experiences, who had lackluster childhoods. And so then what's happening is that you're putting these people who had crappy pasts that are eager, very, very eager to assimilate, to grow, to have positive masculine role models in their lives. And then what you're doing is you're putting them in basic training and then infusing them with these overly masculinized qualities, these bastardized versions of stoicism and military bearing that reject emotion, that do not honor the full aspect of the human being. And it creates dams inside of their nervous system, their endocrine system, the physiological functioning of their, and balanced functioning of their organ system, their mind, their emotions, which bleeds out into their relationships, how they relate to life, their motivation, all these intrinsic factors. So for women, they haven't found that theme to be true, at least to the extent that it's statistically significant. Because again, if we put our mind frame in a female, and that woman or young woman has not had an awesome past, they are being shown statistically to not have the tendency to run to a more male-dominated arena that is the military. This isn't true for everybody, but that seems to be the general theme, again, if you're looking at the larger studies around ACE scores and veterans. So all these factors compiled onto each other, and there's many, many more, but those are the broad strokes. These tendencies can wreak havoc on our lives, on our relationships, especially with ourselves. If we cannot sit with ourselves and be bored, many veterans have a very hard time being bored. They're very, very task oriented. They're motivated. They begin to feel anxious. They do not feel good when they're bored or idle. And I'm a go-getter. I really like to get stuff done and be organized and execute. But we do need to learn to be able to be with ourselves. If we annoy ourselves and we can't be alone with ourselves for any duration of time, then what do you think is our effect on other people? Are we going to be able to be patient and helpful to other people in their time of need, which may not require tremendous, massive, masculine action, but may require a ton of love, understanding, kindness, gentleness, sweetness, patience, stuff like that. Especially those things get muted. So what are the qualities you think we need to work on? The ones that I just mentioned. There's lots more to come with this, but those are the heavy hitting themes. Those are the things that it doesn't matter what era, or even if the veteran was a non-combat veteran. Interestingly, a recent research published in 2014, but went from 1979 to 2012, over 55 million records of veterans, and it came up with the number of 21 veterans that were committing suicide a day. One big theme is that the second leading group to be committing suicide or completing suicide was the age group of 18 to 25, and of 18 to 25, it was not the veterans that had deployed and experienced combat. It was non-combat veterans who were killing themselves. The question is why, and I postulate that the things that we've talked about in this session are heavy, heavy hitters, the big, big reasons why people are heading down that thought process path and following through, because they've literally been trained to disconnect from themselves, from their emotions. This is, again, another reason why veterans have a tendency to feel like an outlier, and that they'll only talk to and connect with, and they only get along with other veterans, because when we're in the military, we're all using these tools that we're trained in basic training, regardless of branch, where we are deflecting and rejecting emotion. We're playing with more of the same overly masculinized qualities. It's an underpinning of American masculine and military culture. This version of impersonality can be a positive, healthy thing, but not when it is rejecting, stuffing, and avoiding emotions. When we reject emotion, we are actually suppressing it or repressing it. So even if you're not in the military, you've never been in the military, or you're not in a first responder position, you can take this example and view it through the lens of whatever culture you come from. The corporate world has these themes. Different countries have these themes. Solutions. Again, the more and more you reflect on topics like these, it's as if whenever you reflect, your awareness might be a small bubble the size of a baseball. But as you reflect, you grow it to the size of a softball. As you grow your awareness through the process of reflection, you grow more and more and more. That growth is growing and creating new puzzle pieces that you can essentially then play with and put together more pieces of your puzzle, and so you understand more. And when you understand more, you are getting off your autopilot and you are living more on purpose. Because remember, the average human being has about 60,000 thoughts a day. 80% or more of those are recycled. That 80% is the autopilot. By growing your awareness, you remove more and more of that autopilot. You live more on purpose. Instead of being a bundle of reactions, having this switchboard on the front of your body, and whatever person, whatever phone call, whatever text, whatever's going on in the news and social media, or whatever situation walks up to you, they essentially look at your switchboard and push a certain button, and there happens a reaction. You're just this 1-2 punch of reactions, and you walk around your life thinking that you're living it, but you're not, because 80% of your interactions are just reactionary buttons that are getting pushed, and bam, there's your response to it. It's just this program. But when you begin to reflect and understand and grow your awareness, play with new puzzle pieces, because you created new puzzle pieces, you are deprogramming your switchboard. You are getting it much, much smaller. You're getting rid of it, and you're living life on purpose. You are responding to your environment competently and consciously and by choice, rather by increasing amounts of choice. The goal and the goal is to get to a place where you will eventually be able to choose which emotion you want to feel and choose which thought you want to think, regardless of the stimuli around you, regardless of the scenario. Even these super sad situations, you don't have to experience this overwhelming amount of negative emotion. Again, we're not cutting off from negative emotion. We are mastering it. We can feel that negative emotion. Again, it's not a bad thing to feel negative emotion. Sadness, anger, these things are tools that we need to have, but we need to be able to moderate it. And not only that, we need to be able, especially, it begins with the mind. Remember, the thoughts produce the emotions. Those together produce your words. Those together produce your actions. Those together produce your habits. Those together produce your behaviors. Those together are literally who you are. Another huge tool we will get into more and more is meditation. Meditation is nothing more than mental training. It is, if, for example, out in front of you, you have this horizontal line in line with your eyes. The above portion is the conscious mind. The below portion is your subconscious mind. Meditation allows you to dip into the subconscious mind and begin to reprogram stuff. It's a simple, practical, portable tool to help you get to know yourself by way of reprogramming yourself on purpose. It's this inner or internal engineering that you're doing. It's a super healthy practice, and the more connected you are to yourself, the more power you have. It's as if below your surface in the subconscious mind is this huge mainframe computer, and all your crap is mud in your internal gears. The more we clean that away, the more your internal gears move freely and allow energy to, for example, run cleanly and powerfully through your system. It's as if you have this electrical transistor that is so dirty and crappy, it's not allowing the energy that needs to go through it to power through it. As you clean it, as you refine it, as you purify your subconscious mind, more power is going to run through you. You are going to become and feel more confident and confident because you are going to be cleaner. You are literally going to be more powerful. People are going to be drawn to you. You're going to be more magnetic. Things are just going to happen for you. It's because you've removed these negative programs, this subconscious junk and crap we've been programmed since childhood and through all this stuff. So again, use your simple tools and prove it to yourself. Take these ideas into your life and actually practice them, execute, because all the knowledge in the world is impotent. It is powerless if you don't do anything with it. Again, with the cancer analogy, you can have the cure for cancer, but if you don't do anything, if you just sit on it, nothing's going to happen. You're not going to help anybody. Don't become overly bloated with knowledge. Be very critical of what you're putting in your mind, what you're putting in your emotions, what you're watching, what you're listening to, because what you invest your mind and your thoughts in your emotional and mental life into, that is what you become. These subconscious programs, they are either growing because you're feeding them and paying attention to them and allowing the program to run, or those programs are shrinking and becoming weak. Make sure you're feeding the right inner wolf so you can get off autopilot and live on purpose.